Hello again, and welcome to today's video. Today I want to look at a simple game of chess. Just a normal, everyday game of chess that follows the basic principles that we've talked about, the ABCs of chess in the opening. Watches our opponents, each opponent watches his last move. Both sides play for the center of the board, and both sides exchange pieces. A very simple game of chess that anybody here, anybody that I feel that's had just even a few of our lessons would be able to play. Okay, let's get started. White played f4, which is bird's opening. It's an older opening, it's out of fashion now, but it still exerts some control of the center of the board. Black plays e5, which is a gambit. He's hoping to lose a pawn intentionally to develop his pieces. And white takes the pawn. Black plays knight to c6, trying to win it back. White could play d4, holding the pawn, but if he does, black could then play queen check, looking for checks with our queen all the time. Pawn here, now queen takes pawn, winning the pawn back, and attacking this pawn twice, doubling white's pawn, so white really can't play d4, holding the pawn. Instead, he plays knight to f3, a logical move. Black plays d6, again hoping that black takes it, but white wants no part of just taking pawns here. He wants to develop his pieces. He wants to follow the ABCs of chess. So he plays e4 and he allows black to recapture his pawn. And black does. He could recapture using the knight as well, chooses the pawn. And now white could play bishop to c4, following the ABCs of chess, attack the center, bring out your b's and knights and castle, but instead he plays c3. He wants to play d4 and then maybe at some point before or after still develop to c4, maybe the bishop. But this move is fine, this is what he plays. And black plays knight to f6, attacking the unguarded white pawn. White now plays bishop to c4. He decides not to protect his e-pawn. Okay. So what would happen if black captures the e-pawn now with knight takes pawn? Well, what white could play here, again, he can do a few things here. White could just castle, again, giving black a pawn, but developing his pieces. Or play queen e2, which is a very logical move here. I mean, if knight back, then knight takes pawn, regaining the pawn. Of course, black could play a move like this, for example, and the game could get complicated. Then knight, pawn here, and maybe knight back here, and still capturing the pawn. So black really can't win a pawn here. And black chooses to go on with his development to bring his pieces out. And he moves bishop to c5, both sides following the ABCs of chess. And white now guards his pawn with d3. Black plays a6. He wants to either play b5, attacking white's bishop on c4, or even making an escape hatch back on a7 for his bishop. Okay, white plays queen to e2. One of the things you might want to do is put in the way bishop to e3 so he can now castle kingside, or he might be preparing queenside castling as well. But this is a development move, okay? Black now plays his own bishop to e6. It's allowing white just to take the bishops off the board here, doubling his pawns, messing up his pawns, and white, in fact, takes off. Bishop and black must recapture, and recaptures with the f-pawn, of course. Black doesn't want to be a bishop down, he recaptures the piece. But his pawn's a little bit broken up here, but no harm, no foul. You know, he's got a half-open file. No, there's an open file, really. It's going to be very hard to get to this pawn. Black can guard it with queen to here if he needs to at any point. So, let's see what happens here. White at this point moves to e3, his bishop from the queen side, blocking off the diagonal, allowing him the chance to castle kingside if he wishes, or preparing maybe to queenside castle after, say, knight on b to d2. Black can either capture, trade, bishops, retreat, or the move he chooses, which may be best. So black plays what's probably the best move at this point, queen of d6, protecting the bishop on c5, developing his queen, getting it off the back rank, perhaps preparing even a castle queenside. Certainly he still has the option open to castle kingside. White takes the bishop. Queen recaptures the bishop. And white continues with his development with knight b d2. Again, maybe preparing the castle queenside, but getting his pieces off the back rank. Just moving his pieces out. Black could, of course, castle queenside here. He could castle kingside here. Chooses to place his rook to the center of the board on d8 on a half-open file, attacking the white d pawn. Even though it's guarded, it's still a good centralizing move. White plays knight to b3, attacking the queen. Again, maybe getting ready to play d5, so it's protected once, twice, 3 times, that kind of thing. Attacks the queen to gain time. Black retreats his queen. And now white completes his development by castling queenside, and black castles kingside. Many good choices for white here now. Okay, still, there's not really much going on here. This is a pretty simple game to understand. I mean, white doesn't have a lot of plans here. He can maybe play his king here, further guarding his king. Certainly, maybe d4, attacking the center, something we want to do. The pawn would now be guarded once, twice, 3, 4 times. Although it's attacked 4 times, it's guarded enough. So those are the 2 principal choices. Maybe even knight to g5, attacking the pawn on e6 is another choice. White chooses d4, attack the center. Chess is played in the center of the board, attack the center. Black captures, wants to straighten out maybe his pawns in the middle of the board because he's got 2 doubled, isolated pawns. Neither pawn is being guarded by anything. Gets rid of those. White could recapture a number of different ways. He chooses to recapture with his knight on b3, excuse me. Again, black doesn't have to capture the knight. Black could play, for example, pawn here. If he does, though, he would probably lose a pawn here. Then knight takes knight. Rook takes rook, rook takes rook, queen takes knight, and then knight takes pawn here. But this pawn would be attacked twice, too. So well, let's take a look at that. What I just looked at is this. If e5, this is a move that black could make, attacking the knight. White could capture the knight here. Black could perhaps then capture the rook here. White could capture the rook here. Notice we're just looking at the captures. Now, again, black must capture the knight back, otherwise he's a piece down. White could then capture the e-pawn, but black in turn could recapture the e-pawn and the game is even. So this is how you think through a series of captures. This is a long series of captures. It was complicated, I understand, but this is the thought process. This is how it's thought through. You look at each capture slowly and carefully, one capture at a time, and try to picture the board in your head after each capture. It's tough. I get it, but I mean, that's the way it's done. This is the way. You must look through a series of captures to make sure that you're not going to lose something in the end. So e5 could be played here. This is not the move that black plays. Black chooses instead to capture the knight. And, well, again, white could recapture with his knight or his pawn. He chooses to recapture using his rook. Okay? Black recaptures the rook. White recaptures the rook. And now he plays e5. Okay, everything is even still. Each side has got 6 pawns. Now these 2 pawns are exactly even. Everything's even. 2 pawns here, 3 pawns here, queens, queens, knights, knights, rooks, rooks. It's a very even position. All that's happened here is there's been captures, trades throughout the game. White could play knight here. He opts to go knight here, chooses to go knight back here, attacking the black unguarded e-pawn here. Black, of course, wants to protect his pawn, doesn't want to lose a pawn. He could play rook here, could play queen here, could play queen here, queen here. He chooses to go queen to c5, keeping the queen centralized in the middle of the board. Again, chess is played in the middle of the board, good place for the queen. White can now put his rook on an open file if he chooses on e1. Whoops, excuse me. Rooks belong on open files. There's no other pawns. He could play his rook here, further protecting his e-pawn, so now he could move his queen. White chooses to play knight to d2, protecting his e-pawn, and it's got a little bit of threat to it. Whenever you make a knight move, you should always try to look the next move ahead, if you can, and see if there's a better square you can put it on. So it jumps from one square with the idea of going to another square where it's better. In this case, White has another idea in mind here. Okay, so Black chooses to move his queen back to c6, attacking this pawn twice. Now White's got to guard it twice. But he just wants to keep the queen and the knight tied down. Okay, White chooses to play rook to here. He has a lot of good choices. He can play queen check here, trading queens off, which is a very good choice. He can play rook here, rook here. He chooses to play rook here, maybe with the idea of rook to f5, attacking this pawn. Something like that, maybe. And again, the rook is on an open file. Even though there's pieces here, there's no pawns here. A file is considered an open file if it's got no pawns on it. So putting a rook on an open file is always a good thing, usually. Black plays queen here, attacking the unguarded a-pawn. So whenever our opponent moves, we must look at her move, or his move, and say, what is she attacking? What can she capture of ours? So in this case, we would want to look at our opponent's last move. We never make a move without looking at our opponent's last move first. You guys have heard me say that over and over in class, at least classes where I've taught. And looking is one of the key things to do in chess. It's a key skill. Look at your opponent's last move. So in this case, White could play king here, guarding the pawn. He could play knight here, guarding it indirectly. Or he could even push the pawn here. White chooses to play queen here now, getting the queens off the board. Now again, Black must exchange queens. If he doesn't, White will. The queen is unguarded, by the way. So he must either guard it, or exchange it, or move it back to where it is guarded. And he chooses to take it off the board. White must recapture, of course. White does recapture. Everything is still even here. Okay, we've now taken queens off. Everything's even. Black can capture a pawn here, and he does with his knight. White, of course, could capture here too immediately, but he chooses to take the queens off, the rooks off, excuse me, first. So rook takes rook, check. King takes rook, and now he captures the pawn back, and everything is even. Each side has 5 pawns, 3 pawns on each side, 2 pawns on each side. Both knights are right in the middle of the board. Both kings are on the opposing squares. One's on c1, the other's on f8, so diagonal position is as even a position as you can get in chess. It's an equal game. This game lasted for, maybe another 20 moves or so, believe it or not. And it did end up a draw. Draws in chess are good. Doing the same in chess is good. You've, again, probably heard me mention this, that you don't always have to be winning or losing in chess. You can just be equal. You can be the same as your opponent. A draw is a tie in chess. Some of the best games, personally, that I've played over my 50 years of tournament play, it's a long time, it's a lot of games, have been draws. In fact, this particular game we looked at here, I was playing the white pieces, and my opponent was a very accomplished, strong master as Black, a man named John Curdo from Massachusetts. This man actually has won, factual, it's a fact now, 500 chess tournaments in his life. It's got to be some sort of a record. He's a life master. I believe he's also an international master. He's the multi-time New England champion. When I played him, he was a little bit older, not significantly, but a little bit older. Still a very, very good player. So I was happy to trade pieces to basically, you know, have a draw here. I was very happy. This is one of the best games I've ever played to get a draw against someone of this person's stature, someone who's this good at chess. This guy is a true talent, one of the strongest players that I've ever played in my life, actually. So I was glad to get a draw. But, you know, this is a game that any of you could have played, or most of you at least could have played this game. I believe that. All you had to do is follow the general principles that we've talked about for a long time in our classes. Follow the ABCs of chess, get your king castled and protected, bring your pieces out towards the center of the board, get all your pieces off the back rank, try not to move the same piece twice before you've moved the rest of your pieces off the back rank, get your pieces into the game. You can't play chess without pieces being into the game, and then just look at our opponent's last move. If he's attacking something, make sure it's guarded. If you can trade pieces, trade bishops for knights or bishops for b's, or knights for knights, trade rooks for rooks, make the trades. The less pieces on the board, the less complicated the game is, the easier it is for you to figure out what's going on. The easier it is for you to see the checks and the captures and the checks. So, the moral of the story, the moral of this game, is that keep it simple. Chess is complicated enough. You don't have to make it more complicated. If you can trade some pieces, trade some pieces. But just follow our basic general principles that we've talked about for a long time. Develop your pieces, follow the ABCs of chess, look at your opponent's last move, guard your pieces, and make trades if possible. So remember, keep it simple, follow the ABCs of chess, look at your opponent's last move. See you again next time.